Kishore Mahbubani is here. He was formerly Singapore's ambassador to the United Nations, now dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy in Singapore. Has a new book called Beyond the Age of Innocence, Rebuilding Trust Between America and the World. I'm pleased to have him here. Welcome. Tell me about, first of all, why Beyond the Age of Innocence? Was there a time in which there was a sense of innocence about America's perception around the world?
Yes, I think there was a sense of comfort that America had in the world before. A sense that America was well regarded, well respected, looked up at in all corners of the world. I think what Americans haven't woken up to is a sea change in the perceptions of America. My fear is that we are reaching what you would call, I guess, a tipping point. Up to now, the positive perceptions of America still, I think, are larger than the negative perceptions of America. But the negative perceptions are growing. And at some point, you hit a tipping point. And when you hit the tipping point, basically you get washed away with all the reservoirs of goodwill that America has built up over decades being lost because of lack of attention by America to how it is perceived in the world. And that's why I wrote the book.
How is it perceived in the world?
Well, I think increasingly more and more people, ordinary people, by the way, begin to feel that American power is impacting them directly, affecting their lives, and Americans are completely unaware that American power is affecting them. And I use the analogy of having a car rolling over your toes and parked on your toes. And American power is like that car that has rolled over the toes of many people in the world and affecting them directly. And they're saying, how come Americans are not aware of this?
Of how people feel about the use of American power.
That's right.
Is all of this about Iraq, or is it about some other issue, or is it about some sense of America's presence because its culture and its and so much about America is so pervasive around the world?
No, it's not just about Iraq, by the way. And it's about a sea change in the world that has taken place. See, there is a major structural contradiction that is developing as a result of two forces. The first force is that the world is shrinking. It's getting smaller and smaller. But American power is not shrinking. American power still remains as strong as ever. So if you can imagine these two forces coming together, you begin to understand why the problem actually is quite a profound one. Because American power is not going to diminish. American power, frankly, is going to increase in the years to come. But its impact on the rest of the world is going to increase. And therefore, people all over the world who feel the impact of this American power are beginning to ask, why can't Americans see that they are affecting our lives? There is a direct impact on them. I mean, Iraq is probably one of the latest instances of how American power works. But it goes back beyond that.
Let's go to the people of Singapore.
Yeah.
How is American power affecting the people of Singapore?
Well, Singapore, as you know, is a very tiny country. And Singapore, by and large, has benefited a great deal from American power. But we live in a region called Southeast Asia, where, as you know, there are more Muslims in Southeast Asia than there are in the Arab world. And so when the negative sentiments in Southeast Asia, among the Muslims in Southeast Asia towards America, begin to rise, they affect us directly because of our close relationship with America.
So it's not so much American power, it is in fact because you're perceived as being a friend of America, and therefore there is an animosity towards Singaporeans?
There is, I wouldn't say animosity, but there's a sense of resentment towards Singapore because of our close association with America. But we can live with it. But the challenge is, how do you ensure that Southeast Asian Muslims do not become as radicalized as Muslim communities elsewhere?
Okay, before we go, let's just talk about two other ideas. Number one is the rise of India and China. Tell me how that will change the world in your judgment.
It'll change the world enormously. I mean, fundamentally, we're seeing the end of what I call a 500-year cycle of human history. For the last 500 years, essentially, if you look in terms of how decisions that affect the world have been made, for most of the last 500 years, they were made in European capitals. It's what Lisbon decided, Portuguese spread all over the world. It's what Spain decided, what France decided, what England decided, and that affected the world. Now that's all going to change now in the 21st century. With the rise of India and China, and as they're by the year 2020, 2025, in PPP terms, China will have the world's largest economy, and India may well have the third largest economy in PPP terms. So
it'll be China, the U.S., India, Japan.
And then Japan, yes. Right. And you notice that out of the 4 top economies in the world in PPP terms, 3 will be Asian. And if that happens, then clearly the sense that you can continue to make decisions in the North or in the West affecting the rest of the world, that's got to change.
And how will it change? And what do you think ought to be the approach
from the West? It would be wonderful, frankly, if the world order that America created in 1945, which was, by the way, a great world order, because in that world order that America created, it allowed new nations to emerge, succeed, prosper, and be accepted, like Japan and Germany. Rose out of the ashes, came out, became accepted, and the world order wasn't destabilized when new powers emerge. The challenge for us in the next 10, 20 years is how do you allow new powers like China and India to emerge also and not destabilize the world order? So the question is whether or not the multilateral systems that we have built up are flexible enough for that to happen. Because if they're not, then you have to rechange the world order. And that's going to be very painful.
And how should that be done?
Well, it will be done in different slices. I mean, I'll give you one example. As you mentioned, I was ambassador to the UN for the last 6 years. They've been talking about UN Security Council reform for the last 10, 12 years or so. And it never moves ahead. And that reflects a rigidity in the system, because what you have in the UN Security Council basically is a snapshot of the power structure of 1945. Now 60 years have gone by, we are in 2005. Surely the snapshot's got to change. But as you know, changing the UN Security Council is very difficult because new powers want to come in, and any new power that wants to come in gets blocked by another power. And this inability to transform the global system to reflect new realities creates contradictions. And that's what you have to do. You change the Security Council, change the IMF, change the other global institutions to reflect the power structure of 2005 or 2015 or 2025.
When people debate whether India or China will dominate, what are the factors they ought to consider?
Well, I think it is, frankly, an open question. What kind of power China will emerge as? If we had been having this discussion 5, 10 years ago, I would have been a bit more optimistic, because the Chinese clearly were not inclined towards disrupting the world order. Because for China, which has suffered 2 centuries of humiliation, the moment is now. Finally, after waiting 200 years, the Chinese people believe that they can stand up and face the world with dignity, that China is succeeding, and the Chinese will have a society as good as that in the modern Western world. They feel the moment is arriving now. But just
because they adopted a Western economic model?
That's right, because they adopted the Western economic model, and because they bought the story that it's okay for China to emerge as a world power as long as you play by the rules. And China was willing to play by the rules. But now, increasingly, the Chinese feel that as they emerge and become stronger, they feel that the world may not be ready to accept them. And they're beginning to build defenses. They're beginning to feel that they may be encircled, that they may be isolated.
Encircled by whom?
Oh, I probably...
The Russians,
I think
the Americans, the Japanese, the Koreans?
I think the main fear will be encirclement by the United States of America. Because as Chinese power emerges, they fear that some American policymakers will fear that the rise of China is a zero-sum game vis-a-vis America.
Yeah.
And
but at the same time, if you talk to people in the Bush administration, people that in the State Department, the former Secretary of State or the former Deputy Secretary of State, they will say 2 things to you. One is they'll say that the most important challenge, as you say, over the coming years is in a sense the peaceful rise of China and India, which together are 37% of the world's population, which is remarkable. 37% of the world's population.
And they're rising.
And they're going up. Yeah. Secondly, they will say that the thing that they're proudest of about American foreign policy, at the beginning of the Bush administration, is the relationship with China and the things that they have done in order to be responsive to China. China became a member of the World Trade Organization, a whole range of other things. So they'll say that America is sensitive and responsive to the rise of China. Now, when they go to Europe and they don't want to see an arms embargo lifted, that suggests something else because of America's relationship to Taiwan.
Well, it's true that America's relations with China have been stable since 2001. But as you know, that was in part due to a historical accident called 9/11. 9/11 changed the geostrategic priorities of the United States of America. America shifted its strategic sights onto Osama bin Laden, onto the threats in the Islamic world, onto Iraq. And basically, the Chinese feel that that's bought time for them. I met someone recently who said he was in Beijing when 9/11 happened. He said he could hear this collective sigh of relief.
Because the focus would be somewhere else?
Because the focus would be somewhere else. Because until then, they thought that they would be the focus. And as you know, in April 2001, when the American plane was down in Hainan Island, that was a real eyeball-to-eyeball meeting down there. I think what is unclear is not the short-term signals that America sends to China, because the short-term signals are clear, and frankly, the Bush administration has done a good job of managing that. What is unclear are the long-term signals. If China rises, if China succeeds, let me give you a simple example. When will the G7 invite China to come to the table? So if you take 37% of the world's population, if they continue to do well, how can you say you have a meeting of the industrial powers of the world and not have India and China at the table? But how do you bring them in? And this is what I try to also discuss in the book. I mean, I appreciate America's concern about promoting democracy. And certainly in the long run, China's got to become a democratic country and will become a democratic country. But the lesson of history is that it cannot be done overnight. And to say that we will not admit you to G7 until you become a democracy means that you're excluding China at the most important point of its growth, when it is deciding how to adapt to the world, how to adjust to the world, and it's better to have them in the process, working with you than working outside the process. And it is these inflexibilities in the world that should be of concern to us.
Do you think China, just taking China for example, wants to play by the rules?
I think they do. As of now, I think they very much would like to do so, because I think the Chinese, this is a controversial statement, okay? Chinese historians will disagree with me. By and large, when China has been powerful, it hasn't sent large armies, large navies out to conquer the world. And as you know, traditionally, when China becomes powerful, countries around the world, including in Southeast Asia, begin to pay tribute to China, and often it's a form of psychological tribute more than any kind of material tribute. And China is quite content being the middle kingdom. And so if that kind of China emerges, one that's quite happy to say, okay, just accept the fact that I'm a major power, treat me as one, and I'll be happy. I don't need to go out.
But I think the United States does accept the fact that China is a major power. They may not do everything that the Chinese want, and certainly,
I think
certainly the Chinese don't do everything that the Americans want as well. But they accept.
But this is why
accept China as a major power. They clearly do that. I mean, they wouldn't say the things that they do about the rise of China.
But this is why I wrote the book, because you have one set of perceptions of how America perceives the world and how Americans perceive America's role in the world. And then you have another set of perceptions of how the rest of the world perceive America's role in the world. I mean, what you give is a very good example. That's why I gave the example of the famous American bombing of the Chinese embassy in Belgrade. Every American policymaker emphasizes it was a mistake, an accident. Every Chinese policymaker is convinced that it was deliberate. How can that be? One small event.
Tell me what you think.
Frankly, I do not know. I mean,
last night, been deliberate?
Sorry?
Do you think it might have been deliberate?
Well, last night someone said to me, a friend of mine had written a paper in Harvard on this bombing.
Yeah.
And he said it so happened that if it was an accident, that the missile happened to hit the precise floor of the Chinese embassy and the precise room in the Chinese embassy where intelligence was being collected. There was a pinpoint strike at the critical point in the Chinese mission. Now, that takes an incredible amount of coincidence. I would like to believe it's an accident, but I have not been able to convince any Chinese so far that it's an accident. This Gulf is dangerous.
Are you saying that that the president, for example, doesn't appreciate the fact that China is a major power?
No, I think in its deeds, in its words, by the way, America says the right things. In its deeds, often it sends mixed signals. And that's why I gave the example, for example, of entry into G7, for example. The time has come. China is so big now, so important, so influential. When are you going to bring them to the table, the G7? And then you have this agonizing debate within America about what to do. And therefore, these are the sort of signals that...
agonizing debate about what?
About how to accommodate the rise of China. There are mixed signals, being sent out. And the critical thing is not what you think, not what I think. The critical thing is, what do the people in Beijing think?
The leadership in Beijing? Or
leadership, the population. I mean, when I speak to young Chinese intellectuals, I'm astonished at the level of distrust that they have of the United States of America. And I say, why? I mean, fundamentally, the United States allows you to export. As you know, China has got a trade surplus of $100 billion
per year
with America. Right. As you know, China is probably one of the largest, if not the largest,
holders of U.S. debt.
Purchasers of U.S. debt.
Yeah.
So
along with Korea and Japan.
That's right, Korea, Japan, and Singapore and others. But there seems to be a healthy symbiotic relationship developing. So one would think that if you let things go on course, things would be okay.
So, but it seems to me that what you are saying is that the signal test ought to be whether the United States tries to get China into the G7.
Well, just one example, but there are other indicators. And by the way, India too. By the way,
right?
And it's important. That's not.
Sure.
I think the big change that has happened in the last few years is a recognition that it's not just China that is emerging, it's China and India are both emerging. And when you have two of the world's most populous countries succeeding and doing well, we should be celebrating it, by the way. It's good for us that part of the world is doing well. But at the same time...
That's why it's not a zero-sum game.
No, it's not a zero-sum. And that's the 1945 world order that the United States created, which was brilliant.
Well, one thing the United States should do, it should listen to its friends, and you are considered a friend. Beyond the Age of Innocence, Rebuilding Trust Between America and the World. It's important to hear ideas like yours, and I'm glad you could be here.
Thank you very much.